There are moments in life when time seems to stand still. For Zara Lewis, that moment came the instant her 4-year-old daughter collapsed under the stage lights of her very first dance recital. 1 second, Sienna was spinning with sunlight in her smile. The next thing she knew, she was crumpled on the floor, her little body frighteningly still as the crowd gasped and Zara's world shattered without warning. Within minutes, the auditorium became a chaotic scene. Sirens, shouting, a stretcher cutting through stunned parents. And Zara is running beside her daughter, with the kind of desperate strength only terror can create. But the nightmare had only just begun. At the hospital, doctors delivered the words every parent fears. A heart abnormality, possible genetic origin, immediate surgery is required. And suddenly the truth hit Zara with the force of a blow. She only knew half of her daughter's medical history. To save Sienna, she needed the one man she had spent years hiding from. The man who had destroyed her trust, threatened her family, and forced her to disappear. The man who didn't even know he had a child. Adrian Blackwell. When she finally called, Zara expected anger, distance, coldness. She never expected the sound she heard instead, a man breaking. Hours later, Adrian arrived at the hospital, not as the ruthless CEO he once was, but as a father seeing his child for the very first time. Through glass, through machines, through tears. That night, enemies became something else entirely. Two broken parents clinging to the same hope. And this is where our story begins. Rain sheeted down the glass like the sky was trying to wash the city away. From the 42nd floor, the world below blurred into streaks of gold and red, a watercolor of traffic lights and hurried strangers. Evelyn Marlowe stood alone in the executive lounge, palms pressed flat against the window, as if she could steady a life that had already begun to slip from her grasp. She had imagined this moment so many times, envisioning Adrian Hale walking toward her with warmth instead of distance. And imagined him reaching for her the way he used to, whispering her name like it meant something to him. Imagine that beneath all his ambition, there was still a man capable of choosing her. But when the door slid open behind her and Adrian stepped into the room, she knew instantly that the man she loved was not the one standing there. His expression was carved from marble, his posture rigid with control, and in his hand was an envelope that already felt like the end of something. He placed it on the glass table between them. No flourish, no hesitation, just a clean, quiet execution. $50,000. Money meant to erase her, money meant to erase their child. Evelyn's pulse hammered against her ribs. The lounge felt colder, smaller. Her breath barely made it past her lips as she searched Adrian's face for something, anything, that resembled the man who used to trace constellations on her skin. He didn't offer softness, he offered logic, business, consequences. His engagement was the cornerstone of a merger that would elevate his company into a new stratosphere. His fiancée's family held the votes on the board he needed. Evelyn's pregnancy threatened all of it. Her child was an inconvenience, a miscalculation, a liability to be removed quietly before it could disrupt the empire he was building. When she whispered that she was keeping the baby, something shifted in Adrian's expression. Something dark and cold, like a storm forming over still water. He stepped toward her with slow, deliberate control. He didn't raise his voice, he didn't shout, he didn't have to. He threatened everything she loved with soft, measured precision. Her mother's nursing job, her brother's construction contracts, her family's stability, all of it dangled between them like a blade he could drop with a single word. Evelyn nodded because she knew predators didn't need decibels to destroy, they only required silence. He walked her to the elevator like a gentleman escorting a date, then pulled her into one last kiss. A kiss that felt like ivy, soft at first touch, strangling by the end. Evelyn walked out of the tower without looking back. The rain swallowed her instantly, soaking her hair, her clothes, her certainty. She touched her stomach and whispered a promise she had no idea how to keep. She reached her apartment and began packing on autopilot, folding clothes with trembling hands, erasing pieces of her life one drawer at a time. She booked a flight under a false last name. She told herself she could get away before Adrian decided she hadn't obeyed quickly enough. But then came the knock. 3 sharp, confident knocks belonging to someone who never had to ask permission to enter a room. Her breath caught. She crept toward the people. The man outside was not Adrian. He was worse. Adrian's future brother-in-law, the family's fixer, a man who smiled in photographs but whose eyes never learned how. He called her name with quiet charm, and when she didn't answer, he began picking the lock. In the seconds before the door swung open, Evelyn realized Adrian hadn't just abandoned her, he had handed her over. The man who stepped inside wasn't there to negotiate. He wasn't there with choices, only outcomes. Only the message that her existence was a complication, and complications were meant to be handled. She tried to run. He was faster, stronger, and when darkness swallowed her, the last thing she saw was him smoothing his jacket as if violence were nothing more than an administrative task. Hours later, Evelyn woke in a hospital bed with a concussion and a doctor telling her the baby was still alive. And in that sterile, humming room, she decided that she would vanish so completely that no threat Adrian Hale ever made would touch her again. Evelyn Marlowe died quietly that morning, but a different woman rose to take her place. A woman who would one day return to the city that Adrian ruled. A woman who would make him regret the night he chose his empire over her life. This was the night everything shattered, but it was also the night she began to rebuild, not as the woman he once held, but as the woman he would one day fear. The coastal town was nothing like the city Evelyn had fled. Here, the nights were quiet, broken only by the distant hum of fishing boats or the soft call of seabirds. The air smelled of salt instead of exhaust, and no one wore sharp suits or carried the weight of corporate ambition on their shoulders. It was the kind of place where no one asked questions as long as you paid for your coffee and minded your business. For Evelyn, it was the perfect place to disappear. She arrived under a different name, one borrowed from her grandmother, carrying 2 suitcases and the envelope of money Adrian had pressed into her hand. She hated touching it, hated knowing each bill was soaked in betrayal, but survival demanded pragmatism. She used the money to rent a small apartment above a bakery, its floors uneven and its walls thin enough to hear the ovens warming at dawn. It was far from glamorous, far from everything she had known, but it was hers. And it was safe. The morning sickness came hard and fast. The exhaustion came next. But each time fear threatened to swallow her, she pressed a hand to her growing stomach and whispered that her child would never know the world she had escaped. Her daughter would never be a secret someone tried to erase. She would be loved loudly, fiercely, completely. Evelyn found work at a diner near the pier, the kind of place where fishermen stopped before sunrise and tourists wandered in after long days at the beach. The owner was a woman in her 50s with a gravelly voice and kind eyes who hired Evelyn without asking why she had arrived in town alone and pale with fear still clinging to her. Evelyn worked long shifts, memorizing coffee orders, carrying trays with steady hands, learning to exist in plain sight without being seen. Months passed, her belly grew, her fear settled into something quieter, something that looked almost like determination. And then the night came when she felt the first flutter, faint as butterfly wings, a whisper of life that made her sink to the floor in tearful gratitude. She promised the tiny presence inside her that their life would be built on strength, not fear. When her daughter was born in a small regional hospital, the pain was sharp. But the moment she heard that first cry, it felt like the world realigned around something pure and new. She named her Lily, a name that felt soft enough for innocence and potent enough for survival. Lily had dark hair, a scrunched little face, and eyes so deep and curious that Evelyn thought she might drown in them. The first months were hard. Exhaustion became a constant companion, sleep came in fragments, and money dwindled far faster than she had planned. But Lily was worth every sacrifice, worth every sleepless night and every shift Evelyn took at the diner with aching arms and a tired smile. And then the letter arrived. Forwarded through a chain of offices Evelyn had never heard of, addressed to the name she no longer used. A simple envelope containing the news that a man she had never met, Her biological father had left her an inheritance. Not enough to buy the world, but enough to buy freedom. Enough to change everything. Evelyn stared at the letter for hours, Lily asleep against her chest. She had never known her father. He had left before she was born, disappearing into wealth and regret. She had spent her life believing she was unwanted, forgotten, but in death he had reached for her in the only way he could. The money he left her was a door she had never expected to open. She used it carefully, strategically. She paid off debts, found a better apartment with sunlight in the mornings and space for Lily to crawl. Hired a part-time nanny so she could study at night. Books and online courses filled her table. Finance, economics, investment principles, corporate maneuvering. Words and worlds she once only overheard in Adrian's office now became weapons she learned to wield with precision. Lily grew. So did Evelyn's ambition. She learned to read financial statements the way she once read Adrian's moods by the tension in his shoulders. She learned to identify opportunities others dismissed. She was aware of the rise and fall of empires. She followed every thread of the business world until she understood it deeply enough to step into it. Her first investment was bold, reckless, a biotech startup founded by 3 brilliant women that the industry had ignored. Evelyn saw their potential. She saw echoes of herself in them, overlooked, underestimated, fighting to survive. She poured half her inheritance into their vision. 18 months later, the startup sold for millions. Overnight, Evelyn Marlowe, the woman who had once vanished in fear, became Evelyn Thorne, a rising force in the investment world with a name tied to legacy and power. She claimed her inheritance publicly, took her seat on the board of her father's firm, faced down executives who had dismissed her, forced them to acknowledge her not as the girl they forgot, but as the woman they now depended on. By the time Lily turned 3, Evelyn had built something extraordinary. Not just wealth, not just influence, a life, a future, a foundation stronger than anything she had lost. But even as success wrapped around her like armor, she felt a quiet tremor beneath it, a vibration in the air, a shift she couldn't yet see. 4 years after she disappeared, Adrian Hale was about to walk back into her world. He would not recognize the woman she had become, and that was precisely the point. The corporate summit was the kind of event Evelyn had learned to navigate with graceful precision. Polished glass walls, velvet carpets, and executives moving in carefully choreographed patterns. Her heels clicked with quiet confidence as she walked backstage, reviewing the final notes for her keynote presentation. She had delivered talks to investors across the country, but today felt different. There was a subtle electricity in the air, a restless hum beneath her skin, as though the universe were shifting pieces she could not yet see. When the moderator introduced her, the applause rose like a warm tide. Evelyn stepped onto the stage with the poise of someone who had fought her way through fire and emerged untouched by the ash. Her tailored graphite suit hugged her frame with quiet authority. Her hair, pulled back in a sleek twist, revealed the sharpened angles of her jaw. She looked every inch the woman she had fought to become. Her voice moved through the auditorium with practiced clarity. She spoke of innovation, new funding models, and the silent brilliance in founders that the world still underestimated. The audience leaned forward, drawn not only to her words, but to the force behind them. She had built herself from the remnants of a life that had once nearly destroyed her. Every slide she presented carried echoes of survival. She ended with a wave of applause that filled the hall. But as she stepped off the stage, the air shifted. A sensation, sharp and cold, swept through her, a presence she had not felt in 4 years. She turned, and there he was, Adrian Hale. Time had carved something harsher into him. His suit was immaculate, his posture commanding, but there was a tension in his jaw she had never seen before. A hollowing beneath his eyes, as if sleep had become an occasional visitor rather than a companion. He stared at her like he had collided with a ghost that had learned to walk more powerfully than the living. Evelyn did not break stride. She spoke to the event coordinator, thanked a young intern, and handed Lily's nanny the small bag containing snacks and a toy fox. Her daughter stood beside the nanny, clutching the fox with excited eyes, unaware of the storm gathering behind her. Then Lily laughed, a bright, bubbling sound that sliced through the corridor. Adrian froze. Evelyn felt the moment he saw her child. His eyes widened, the world narrowing to the small girl with dark curls and a smile that mirrored pieces of himself he had never known. His breath faltered. His shoulders trembled, almost imperceptibly. She knew exactly what he was thinking. She had imagined this day, dreaded it, and prepared for it with every ounce of strength she possessed. But preparation did not soften the impact. Their gazes collided across the polished hallway, and for a moment the world stilled. Evelyn walked toward him with quiet steps. No fear, no hesitation, only control. "Mr. Hale," she said, her tone as smooth as glass, "I did not expect to see you here." He swallowed hard. "Evelyn," his voice cracked like dry earth splitting under heat. "You kept her." She met his gaze without blinking. "I kept my daughter." The correction landed with deliberate precision. "Lily is not yours. She belongs only to herself." He looked past her again, drawn uncontrollably to the little girl examining a vending machine as if it contained all the magic in the world. "She has my eyes," he whispered, awe and devastation mixing into something raw. Evelyn's expression hardened. "She has her own eyes, her own life, one that does not include you." Adrian flinched as if struck. She turned to leave, signaling to Lily's nanny. But when she stepped past him, he reached instinctively toward her, fingers brushing the air near her wrist. "Do not," Evelyn said softly, her voice a blade wrapped in velvet. "Please, do not touch me. Please do not pretend you have any right to speak to me beyond this moment." He exhaled shakily. "I need to understand. Please, just tell me where you went. Tell me why you never came back. Tell me why you never told me she was alive." Evelyn paused, not because his plea moved her, but because she wanted him to feel the weight of her truth. "You threatened my family," she said. "You made it clear that my child would never be safe near you or the people you chose. I left to save a life you considered disposable." He tried to speak, but she silenced him with a single look. "Your regret does not interest me. Your questions do not matter. And your presence in our lives comes to an end here." The nanny approached with Lily, who tugged Evelyn's sleeve and pointed toward the parking garage with innocent excitement. Evelyn knelt, adjusting her daughter's small backpack with gentle fingers. "Ready to go home, sweetheart?" Lily nodded with the eager enthusiasm only children carry. Evelyn stood and walked past Adrian without another word. She felt his gaze burning into her back until the door closed behind her with a soft click. Only when she reached the car did her heart finally thunder against her ribs. He had found her. 4 years of silence had fractured in a single moment. And Adrian Hale, the man who once destroyed her world with a whisper, had just glimpsed the one thing he could never claim: his daughter. Evelyn fastened Lily's seatbelt with steady hands, but deep in her chest a storm had begun to churn. Ghosts had returned, and this time she was no longer the one running. The conference room was intentionally neutral, designed for negotiations that required no traces of intimacy or history. A long, polished table reflected the soft overhead lighting, and floor-to-ceiling windows revealed a skyline untouched by the chaos simmering beneath its surface. Evelyn entered with 2 senior associates flanking her, their presence a silent message that this meeting would be strictly business. Adrian was already seated at the far end, surrounded by charts and thick binders that told a story of a company on the edge of collapse. He looked different than the man she once knew, leaner, tired, his confidence dimmed by months of pressure. Yet when he looked up and saw her, there was a flicker of something she recognized instantly: desperation dressed as hope. Evelyn took her place, spine straight, face calm, her presence commanding the space without a single raised word. Her associates settled beside her, laptops open, pens ready, creating a protective wall that made it clear there would be no private conversation. Not today. Not ever again. "Let us begin," she said, her tone smooth and impersonal. Adrian began with numbers, projections, risks. He described the hostile takeover attempt looming over his company and detailed the urgent need for outside investment. His voice stayed steady, clinging to professionalism as if it were the last thread holding him together. Evelyn listened carefully, not with empathy, with accuracy. She evaluated his every slide, every statistic, every trembling note of urgency beneath the polished vocabulary. He spoke like a man drowning who needed someone to throw him a rope, but was too proud to say it directly. When he finished, the room felt heavy with expectation. Evelyn folded her hands atop the table. "Your numbers are impressive," she said calmly. "Your company is salvageable with the proper intervention, and your leadership is still considered valuable enough to justify a strategic partnership." For a moment, hope flickered across his face, a fragile spark, but her eyes hardened. "Before we proceed, I need to understand something," she continued. "Why should I invest in you after the choices you made 4 years ago? After the threats you delivered with absolute clarity, after the consequences you were willing to force on my family and me?" Silence fell so entirely that the hum of the building felt louder. Her associate stiffened, surprised by the shift from finance to the raw past. Adrian's breath caught. His hands tightened around the pen he had been using, as if bracing for impact. Evelyn leaned slightly forward. Her voice softened, but the softness was sharp as glass. "Do you remember what you said to me the night I told you I was pregnant?" Adrian swallowed. "Evelyn, this is not the place." "It is precisely the place," she interrupted, "because you are not asking for a favor. You are asking for salvation, and I need to know why I should extend it to the man who told me to erase my child like she was an inconvenience." His associates shifted uncomfortably. Her words hung between them like a verdict. Adrian lowered his gaze, shame etching itself into the lines of his face. "I regret every word I said," he murmured. "I was afraid. I was under pressure. Luna's family had leverage I could not ignore." Evelyn nodded slowly, her expression unreadable. "Fear does not excuse cruelty. Pressure does not excuse threats against innocent people. And none of it excuses what you allowed to happen afterward." He looked up, confusion flickering. "What do you mean?" Evelyn's jaw tightened. "Your future brother-in-law came to my apartment the night I left. He broke in. He assaulted me. He made sure I understood I was not simply expected to disappear. I was expected to vanish permanently." Adrian's face went white. His denial formed in his eyes before reaching his mouth. She lifted a hand to stop him. "Do not lie to yourself. Do not pretend you did not create the conditions that made that violence possible. You handed me money. You threatened my family. You made me disposable. Your silence permitted others to act." Adrian pressed a trembling hand against his forehead. "Evelyn, I did not know. I swear on everything I have left. I would never have allowed anyone to hurt you." "But you did," she said softly, "because indifference is its own form of violence, and cowardice is its own brand of cruelty." Her associates stared down at their notepads, pretending not to witness the unraveling of a man who once believed he could shape outcomes with a single command. Evelyn stood, gathering her documents. "I will not invest in your company," she said. "Not today. Not ever." Adrian's breath hitched. "Evelyn, please." She looked at him one last time, her gaze as calm and cold as the winter sea. "You taught me long ago that some bridges are meant to burn. I have decided not to build new ones on the ashes you left behind." She turned to leave, her associates rising to their feet with her. At the door, she paused without facing him. "For your sake, I hope you learn that regret is not a substitute for redemption, and suffering is not transformation." Then she walked out, the click of her heels echoing through the silent room. Adrian remained seated, staring at the empty doorway with the crushing realization that the woman he had betrayed had become the force capable of ending everything he still clung to. In that moment, he understood something far too late. Evelyn Marlowe had not come to destroy him. She had decided she would never save him again. Adrian Hale had always believed empires fell dramatically, through explosions of scandal, catastrophic losses, and public humiliation. But the truth was quieter, slower, a steady erosion that began at the edges long before anyone noticed the hollowing at the center. And as he sat alone in his penthouse office that night, city lights stretching beneath him like a constellation of fading dreams, he finally understood what collapse truly felt like. It was not a single blow. It was 1,000 minor fractures he had ignored. The meeting with Evelyn replayed in his mind with the painful clarity of a blade pressed against memory. Her voice was calm and cutting. Her refusal was delivered with the finality of a verdict. He had expected anger, tears, emotion he could reason with or manipulate. Instead, she had given him nothing. Not warmth, not familiarity, not even hatred. She had treated him like history, like a chapter she had outgrown. And for the first time in years, Adrian felt something unfamiliar, not power, not ambition, not the cold logic that had guided every decision he'd made. What he felt now was a grief so deep it stole the air from his lungs. He had lost her long before he knew she was gone. Outside his office door, the world continued in sharp, efficient rhythms. Assistants typing messages, analysts briefing board members, lawyers preparing documents for the hostile takeover he was days away from losing. His once invincible company was slipping through his fingers, each thread unraveling faster as competitors circled like vultures sensing blood. Adrian stared at the financial reports glowing on his screen. Numbers that had once been obedient, predictable. Now they mocked him. Each red line reminded him of one truth he had spent years avoiding. He was no longer in control. When his assistant entered with a stack of urgent documents, Adrian barely lifted his gaze. The young man hesitated before speaking, as if approaching a wounded animal. "Sir, the board is requesting a meeting at the earliest opportunity. They want to discuss contingency options, specifically leadership changes." The words hit him like a punch to the sternum. They want to remove him. Of course they did. Why would anyone trust a man whose empire was shaking at the foundations? A man who had built his reputation on ruthlessness, only to find himself powerless when loyalty no longer feared him. A man whose decisions had been driven by ambition so blinding that it left destruction in its wake. He dismissed his assistant with a nod. He needed quiet, space, air he could not access through the tightness in his chest. He stood at the window and pressed a hand against the glass. The city pulsed with life, indifferent to the unraveling of a man who once believed he owned pieces of it. In the reflection, he saw a version of himself he did not recognize. The sharp lines of success had softened into fatigue. His eyes, once hard with certainty, now carried the weight of years he had wasted chasing the wrong future. He whispered Evelyn's name once, softly, like a confession. Memories surged without permission. She was laughing in his kitchen at midnight. Her hand brushes his cheek, the night he had fallen asleep on her shoulder. The way she said his name was like a promise, not a transaction. But the memory that gutted him most was the look in her eyes that afternoon when she refused him. Calm, steady, unshakable. She no longer saw him as a danger, or desire, or history. She saw him as irrelevant. Another crack in the armor of his world. Adrian returned to his desk and reached for the file he had kept hidden in a drawer for 4 years. A file that contained every piece of information his security team had gathered after Evelyn disappeared. Where did she buy her plane ticket? The car she rented? The town she stayed in before she covered her tracks again? He had ordered the investigation. Then he had ordered it buried. Guilt had suffocated the curiosity before it could grow into action. He stared at the file for a long time. He could not undo what he had done, but he could no longer pretend he had not cared. As he closed the folder, the door to his office opened again, this time without a knock. It was Luna's brother, the man Evelyn feared, the man Adrian had once trusted because he was helpful, efficient, and loyal to Luna's family. The room chilled. "You look terrible," the man said casually, dropping into a chair. "The word is that the board wants you out." "Shame, really. We tried to warn you. Evelyn would only drag you down." Adrian's jaw locked. "Do not say her name." The man smirked. "She should have disappeared. Permanently. We handled it that night. I told you I would." Rage tore through Adrian so violently that he stood without realizing it. His vision blurred with red edges. "You hurt her." The man shrugged. She was a threat. Adrian lunged across the desk. The man stumbled back, shocked, his mocking confidence slipping as Adrian grabbed the front of his shirt and slammed him against the wall. Tell me exactly what you did to her." Silence. A flicker of fear. Adrian's voice dropped, low and lethal. "Because if you do not, I swear I will end you myself." The man swallowed, realizing too late that the king he believed was falling still had teeth. Before he could answer, the door burst open. Security rushed in, pulling Adrian away, their voices rising in confusion. The man adjusted his collar and smirked again, confidence returning now that he was safe behind a phalanx of guards. "You are losing everything, Adrian. Your company, your mind. And you lost your woman years before you even realized it." When the door finally closed behind him, Adrian stood alone in the wreckage of his composure. He sank into his chair, breath ragged, hands trembling. There was only one question left. Was his empire collapsing because of the choices he made in pursuit of power, or because of the one choice that cost him the only future that ever mattered? Either way, one truth settled over him with suffocating clarity. This was no longer the fall of a king. It was the consequence of a man who had destroyed the wrong heart. Adrian Hale reached the absolute bottom, not with a crash, but with a quiet surrender that slipped into his life like an unwelcome shadow. It happened on a gray afternoon, the kind where the sky pressed low and heavy, as if mirroring the weight stacked inside his chest. He found himself parked across the street from a preschool he had no right to be near, watching parents gather their children while he waited for a glimpse of the little girl who did not know he existed. He told himself he just wanted to see her once, just once. But desperation is a slippery thing. It whispers that one moment is harmless, then convinces you to return the next day, and the next, until the pattern becomes a quiet obsession. Adrian knew he should not be there. He knew anyone watching would call him what he feared he was becoming, a man who lingered in shadows, who collected glimpses of a life he forfeited. And yet he stayed, anchored by a longing he could not untangle from regret. He noticed her before he meant to, a small figure in a yellow dress with embroidered flowers along the hem. Striped tights, light-up sneakers that blinked as she hopped down the steps, dark curls that glowed in the pale afternoon sun. She was laughing about something her friend said, the sound carrying across the street like a delicate bell. And all at once, the world narrowed to her alone. Sienna, the daughter he had nearly erased before she ever breathed air. His breath caught painfully. Seeing her in motion made everything more real, more brutal. Photographs were one thing. This living child, animated and joyful, was another. She was a miracle he did not deserve to witness. And she had his eyes. He stayed hidden in his car, gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles whitened. He repeated a mantra he hoped would control him. Do not approach. Do not interfere. Do not ruin anything. But the mantra wavered when the woman who usually picked her up failed to arrive. Minutes stretched. Children left. Teachers made calls. The parking lot emptied until only Sienna remained, sitting on the stone steps, hugging her backpack to her chest. She was trying not to cry. Adrian felt the moment break something inside him. He got out of the car before he fully realized what he was doing. His steps were cautious, careful, slow enough to show he meant no threat. The teacher stiffened as he approached, her posture alert, protective. Adrian stopped several feet away. I notice she has been waiting a long time, he said softly. Is everything all right? The teacher nodded but kept him at a distance. Someone is coming for her. Please step back. He did. He started to leave. But then Sienna lifted her head and looked directly at him. Her eyes shimmered with unshed tears, and her lip trembled even as she tried to sit straighter, braver. Something in that expression unraveled every last strand of discipline Adrian possessed. He crouched down, still far enough not to trigger the alarm. His voice gentled until it was barely more than breath. Waiting is hard, but I bet your mom or your nanny is on her way right now. They're probably rushing to get here as fast as they can. Sienna blinked. My nanny got sick, she whispered. Mama is in a meeting. I'm trying to be patient. And you're doing an excellent job, Adrian said. Being patient is hard, but you're stronger than you think. Before she could answer, a car screeched into the lot, Zara's car. She ran toward her daughter so fast she nearly stumbled. When she saw Adrian crouched nearby, her fear ignited into something primal and fierce. She swept Sienna behind her, her body a shield, her breathing jagged. "Did he touch you? Did he say anything wrong?" "He was nice," Sienna said, confused. But Zara's eyes snapped to Adrian with a fury he had earned long before today. Her voice trembled with rage and terror. "Please stay away from her. Please stay away from us. If you come near her again, I will end you." He lifted his hands in surrender, voice breaking. "I was leaving. I swear. She was alone and scared. I didn't want her to be—" "I do not care what you wanted," Zara snapped. "You are not to come near my child." Adrian stepped back, and back again. Every retreat felt like losing a limb. But he forced himself to keep moving until Zara whisked Sienna away, the car door slamming with the finality of a coffin lid. An hour later, his phone rang. It was her lawyer. A restraining order, effective immediately. No contact, no proximity, no attempts to approach, observe, or interfere. Any violation would bring criminal charges. Adrian did not argue. He did not beg. He hung up and sat in silence, feeling the full weight of what he had done. He had crossed a line he could never uncross. Shame curled through him, suffocating and sharp. He could no longer deny what he had become. Not a protector. Not a father. Not a man attempting redemption. A danger. The following weeks dissolved into a blur of self-destruction. He drank too much. He slept too little. He ignored work calls. He forgot appointments. He avoided mirrors because he no longer recognized the man reflected in them. His brother called from another state, his voice filled with quiet worry. Adrian confessed everything. Every detail. Every regret. Every fear. His brother listened, then said gently, "You cannot stay there. Every day you remain in that city, you make it harder for her to live without fear. You think staying close is punishment for yourself, but it's punishment for them. Leave, let them breathe." The truth landed like a stone dropped into deep water. So Adrian packed the fragments of his life into boxes. He sold the penthouse he once believed proved his success. He severed ties with colleagues who no longer respected him. And on his last night in the city, he drove past Zara's building one final time. He did not stop. He did not linger. He whispered a goodbye she would never hear and kept driving until the skyline disappeared behind him. He left the city at dawn, the road stretching ahead like a long, empty reckoning. It was not redemption, not even close. But for the first time, he chose something that was not about power or pride or control. He chose their peace over his pain. And in that small act of letting go, he felt the faintest shift beneath the ashes. Not forgiveness, but the first fragile stirrings of change. Zara stood in her corner office, surrounded by glass and skyline, watching a city she once feared bend beneath her influence. From this height, everything looked small: people, problems, even the past. But the contract on her desk refused to shrink into insignificance. It sat there with clinical precision, awaiting her signature, the final stroke that would complete the quiet destruction of Adrian Hale. She had spent 2 years building a strategy designed not only to topple his company, but to dismantle every structure holding it aloft. She had crafted it like a surgeon and executed it like a tactician. And now the last stage of the takeover sat before her, legally perfect and morally cold. All she had to do was sign. Her pen hovered above the paper, a breath away from the ending she had once prayed for. But her hand would not move. It stayed suspended, trembling with a hesitation she had never allowed herself to feel. Her assistant stepped inside with soft knocks and soft eyes, placing a stack of messages on the desk. "Legal is waiting. They need your authorization before the close of business. If we delay, his creditors may intervene." Zara nodded, but the words drifted through her like smoke. The assistant waited a beat, then retreated, leaving Zara with the kind of silence that magnifies every choice a person has ever made. She stared down at the contract and felt no triumph, no satisfaction, no vindication, only a hollow ache spreading through her chest like a slow bruise. She had won, and it tasted like ash. For years, she thought revenge would free her, would restore something inside her that Adrian had broken. She felt that watching his empire fall, piece by careful piece, would stitch her wounds shut. But now, at the finish line, she realized she was standing alone in a war zone she had built with her own hands. She set the pen down. Then she picked up the contract, fed it into her office shredder, and watched months of vengeance spit out as thin white ribbons. Her assistant gasped when Zara instructed her to call legal and withdraw the offer. But one nod from her boss was enough. The call was made. The machine of destruction stopped mid-rotation. Zara leaned against the window, palm pressed to the cool glass, breathing slowly as the city stretched beneath her. Towers she once saw as cages now looked like chapters of a story she no longer wanted to write. Her phone vibrated. Owen. His name carried the weight of a future she had been too tired to step toward. He deserved an answer. More than that, he deserved honesty. She answered. "I got the job," Owen said, his excitement barely contained. "Director of pediatric surgery. But the hospital is across the country. They need a decision in 2 weeks." She closed her eyes. He waited for joy, celebration, something bright. But all she could offer was quiet truth. "You should take it." Silence. Then a breath that sounded like resignation wrapped in relief. "And you're not coming with me." Zara swallowed hard. "I would only hold you back. You deserve someone fully present. Someone who loves without looking over their shoulder." Owen wasn't angry. He wasn't cruel. He understood. He wished her healing. He wanted her peace. And then he let her go. When the call ended, Zara sat alone in an office that felt suddenly too large for the woman she had become. She closed her laptop. She grabbed her keys. She left the building before her staff could ask questions. At Sienna's school, her daughter's face lit up in a way that pierced through months of darkness. They spent the afternoon playing, laughing, sitting on sidewalks, and eating messy ice cream cones. Sienna spoke about art class, dinosaurs, and a new book she loved. Zara listened with her entire heart. That evening, as she tucked her daughter into bed, Sienna rested her small hand against Zara's cheek. "Mama," she said, "you seem lighter today." Zara was almost broken. Children always saw the truth before adults dared to. After Sienna fell asleep, Zara sat on the couch and opened her laptop. She deleted every file related to Adrian's downfall. Surveillance photos, financial analyses, internal reports. All of it, gone in minutes. Her head of security called the next morning. He said Adrian had left the city. He said he had packed and moved across the country. He said he had disappeared quietly. Zara listened. Then she issued the final order she never thought she would speak. "Stop tracking him." There was a pause on the line. "Are you sure?" "Yes. I don't want updates anymore. His life is no longer mine to measure." With that, the last thread connecting her to revenge snapped. What remained was her daughter, her career, her dignity, and a slowly healing heart. She spent the following weeks rebuilding her life, not through destruction, but through softness, through presence, through choosing joy instead of war. She took weekends off. She visited her mother more often. She cooked meals instead of ordering takeout. She attended therapy sessions that stripped her open and stitched her back together with gentler thread. Late at night, she sometimes wondered whether she had made the right choice in sparing Adrian from the final blow. But each time she checked on Sienna sleeping peacefully, she knew the answer. She had chosen to break the cycle. She had chosen her daughter. She had chosen herself. Victory had its price. But letting go had given her something she had never expected. Breath. Space. Possibility. For the first time in years, Zara imagined a future not built from vengeance, but from the quiet hope that life could bloom again from the ruins. The auditorium smelled faintly of hairspray, fresh flowers, and the excited chatter of parents waiting for the curtain to rise. It was supposed to be an ordinary afternoon. A milestone. Sienna's first dance recital. Zara sat in the third row, her phone silenced, her work forgotten for once. her entire focus on the tiny form she could already pick out on stage even before the music began. Then the lights brightened. The music swelled. Little dancers twirled in imperfect circles, and Sienna, her brave, bright girl, stepped forward for her solo turn, spinning with an ease that made Zara's heart swell like a tide. Until it happened. Mid-turn, Sienna's knees buckled, her arms fell limp, her small body folded as though the air had vanished around her. She crumpled onto the stage in one silent, horrifying collapse. Time did not slow, it stopped. Zara was already on her feet, her body moving before her mind caught up. A sound tore from her chest, raw, primal, the kind of sound only a mother in terror can make. Parents gasped. Teachers rushed. Someone called for help. The world blurred until all she could see was her daughter lying motionless under the stage lights. The ambulance arrived with jarring speed. Paramedics lifted Sienna's small frame with clinical urgency, speaking in clipped phrases Zara could barely process. Possible cardiac event. Irregular rhythm. Family history. Family history. A phrase that hit like a blow. Because Zara knew her daughter's medical chart had a void, an entire half of her genetic story missing, because she had run, because survival had required erasing everything connected to Adrian Hale. She had no idea what conditions lurked in his bloodline, what inherited shadows might have woven themselves into Sienna's heart. At the hospital, machines were connected. Monitors flickered. Doctors spoke in calm, terrifying voices. Sienna lay unconscious, tiny against the oversized pillows, her skin pale beneath the fluorescent lights. "We need both parents' medical histories," the attending said gently. "Any hereditary conditions, any heart issues, anything that could help us pinpoint the cause of this." Zara wrote down everything she knew about her side of the family. But it wasn't enough. It would never be enough. She stepped into the hallway and pressed her trembling forehead to the wall. There was only one person who could provide the answers the doctors needed, and he was the one person she had vowed never to contact again. Her lawyer arrived within an hour, already mobilizing an emergency request to suspend the restraining order for medical purposes temporarily. But the legal process would take time Sienna did not have. Zara scrolled through her phone until she reached a number she had never deleted, though she told herself she would one day. Adrian's brother, the only connection she had left. Her voice shook as she explained the situation. He didn't question her. He didn't judge her. He gave her Adrian's new number, followed by a quiet, sincere plea. "Be kind to him if you can. He is not the same man he was." Zara hung up, stared at the digits on her screen, and then pressed the call button. He answered on the second ring. "Hello." His voice sounded cautious, tired, smaller than she remembered. Zara felt something inside her crack. "It's Sienna," she said. "She collapsed during her performance. She's in the pediatric intensive care unit. The doctors need your medical history as soon as possible. They're asking about hereditary heart conditions. Please help us." The silence on the other end was short, but filled with shock so sharp she could almost hear him struggling to breathe. "Is she alive? What hospital? I'll send everything I have. My doctor can forward my entire medical file in minutes." "Zara, I'm coming. I'm getting on the next flight. Just tell me where to go." She gave him the hospital name. She did not tell him she needed him. She didn't have to. He was already moving. Within 40 minutes, the hospital received his medical records. The attending physician scanned through them and exhaled with visible relief. This helps a lot." They explained that Sienna had a congenital heart defect that had gone undetected, worsened by genetic factors passed down through Adrian's lineage. She needed surgery, soon, very soon. But she had a shot now, a real shot, thanks to the missing half of her medical story finally being filled in. When Zara stepped back into the room, Sienna opened her eyes for the first time, frightened and groggy. Zara held her hand until she drifted again, then stepped into the hall just as her phone buzzed. "I found a specialist," Adrian said the moment she answered. "The best pediatric cardiac surgeon in the country. She's willing to fly in tomorrow morning. Say the word and I'll cover everything." Zara closed her eyes. For the first time in years, she let herself soften, just a fraction. "Do it," she said quietly. "And Adrian, thank you." That night, after hours of pacing and whispering prayers she didn't know she still remembered, Zara walked into the waiting room to find Adrian sitting alone. He looked smaller, older, like grief had carved him into a different man entirely. He stood when he saw her, but didn't approach, didn't speak, didn't expect. She nodded toward the hallway. "Come with me, just for a moment." They walked into the dim glow of the pediatric wing, where monitors beeped in steady rhythms and fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Zara opened the door to Sienna's room and stepped aside, allowing Adrian to see his daughter for the first time without the distance or shadows being stolen. He froze, his breath broke, and something inside him seemed to collapse and rebuild all at once. Zara watched silently as he approached the bed, his hands trembling, his shoulders shaking with a grief she did not interrupt. He whispered one sentence, barely audible, but full of reverence. "She is perfect." Zara felt tears rise, hot and unexpected. Because in that moment, he wasn't the man who once threatened her, or the man she had spent years fighting. He was simply a father looking at the child he had never been allowed to love. And for the first time she wondered, not with hope, but with fragile curiosity, whether a story built on ruin might still find a way to make space for something gentler. Not forgiveness, not redemption, but perhaps something small and human, something like grace. The hours leading up to Sienna's surgery passed in a strange, suspended time that felt both unbearably long and frighteningly short. The hospital waiting room was a collage of tense faces, the faint scent of disinfectant, and the steady rhythm of footsteps echoing through the corridor. Zara sat with her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles ached, while Adrian remained several seats away, giving her space but refusing to leave altogether. He had flown across the country overnight, arriving with nothing but a duffel bag and a haunted expression that suggested he had barely breathed since hearing Sienna's name. He did not try to speak to Zara, did not press for closeness, did not assume a place in their crisis. He existed nearby, a quiet presence holding his own fear like a fragile glass that might shatter with one wrong breath. The surgeon arrived early that morning, Dr. Reeves, calm, steady, brilliant. She explained the procedure in clear, measured words, detailing risks that made Zara's vision blur at the edges. Sienna would be on bypass. The defect would be repaired. The path to recovery would be a careful and slow process. When the medical team rolled Sienna's bed toward the operating room, Zara walked beside her, brushing a hand over her daughter's hair. Sienna looked small beneath the blankets, her fingers curled loosely around her stuffed lion. She whispered, "Will it hurt after?" "A little," Zara said softly, "but I will be right there when you wake up." Adrian stayed farther back, keeping to his promise not to overwhelm the moment. Yet his face held an agony so raw that even the nurses paused, their eyes widening in sympathetic glances. When Sienna's bed disappeared through the double doors, Zara's legs nearly gave out. She grabbed the wall for balance. Her mother moved to steady her, wrapping her in a firm embrace. That's when her mother noticed Adrian lingering a few paces away. She approached him with the protective steel of a woman who had nearly lost her granddaughter and once nearly lost her daughter. "You have a lot of nerve coming back," she said quietly, "after everything you did." Adrian did not defend himself. He lowered his eyes. "I have no defense. I'm only here for Sienna. If you tell me to leave, I will." Her mother examined him, searching for the arrogance she expected. She did not find it. Something softened, just barely. She handed him a coffee without a word and returned to Zara's side. The hours crawled. Adrian paced the hallway in long, restless strides, stopping only to ask the nurses gentle, respectful questions. Zara alternated between numb stillness and moments when fear clenched her so tightly she had to stand to breathe. Her mother knitted silently, her hands shaking more often than the needles clicked. When the surgeon finally emerged, her scrubs faintly marked with the signs of a lengthy procedure, both Zara and Adrian stood up simultaneously. "The surgery went well," Dr. Reeves said with a reassuring smile. "The defect is repaired, her rhythm stabilized beautifully. She will need monitoring, but your daughter is strong. She came through like a fighter." Zara felt her entire body sag with relief. She pressed a hand to her mouth as tears streamed freely. Adrian turned away for a moment, wiping his own face before he could stop himself. They waited another hour before being allowed to see Sienna. The room was dim, illuminated by the glow of monitors tracing her heart's new rhythm. She looked fragile but alive. Zara took her usual place on the left side of the bed, holding Sienna's hand. After a long hesitation, she nodded toward the other side. "You can come closer." Adrian approached slowly and reverently, as if stepping into a holy space. He stopped beside Sienna's bed and looked at her as though seeing the sun for the first time after a lifetime of storms. "Thank you for letting me be here," he whispered. Zara did not look at him, she just nodded. For a while they stood in silence, listening to the gentle beeping of the heart monitor. It was strangely soothing, that steady rhythm, a reminder that the world had not come to an end. After a long time, Zara finally spoke, her voice quiet and strained. "I destroyed your company." Adrian did not flinch. "I know. I wanted you to suffer. I thought hurting you would fix the part of me that you broke, but it didn't. It only hollowed me out. It made me someone I don't want to be." He met her gaze for the first time. "You had every right to destroy me, and you did. You saved our daughter. You saved her because you're everything I wasn't strong enough to be." Zara swallowed, unable to decide whether the confession eased her pain or sharpened it. Over the following days, as Sienna slowly regained strength, a quiet rhythm formed between them. Adrian brought coffee for the nurses. Zara read stories to Sienna. Her mother kept watch from the hallway, and though they rarely spoke directly, the space between Zara and Adrian shifted, still broken, still complicated, but no longer charged with the same desperate hostility. Sienna woke more fully on the third morning. Her lashes fluttered, her eyes adjusting to the light. She whispered, "Mama." Zara leaned in with a trembling smile. "I'm here, baby." Sienna looked around the room, her gaze landing on Adrian by the window. "You're the nice man from the school day," she said weakly, "the one who said I was patient." Adrian swallowed hard. "Yes, I was there." Sienna blinked, her voice small. "Are you Mama's friend?" Zara hesitated. Adrian didn't. "I care deeply about you." Sienna accepted this with the simple logic of a child recovering from fear, then drifted back into sleep. Later, when Zara and Adrian stepped into the hallway, he took a breath as if preparing himself for a truth he wasn't sure he had the right to speak. "I know my place in her life is small, maybe non-existent. I'm not asking for anything. I want to help if there's ever another emergency or if you need any information. I'll stay out of your way. Just, please let me know if she ever needs anything." Zara considered him for a long moment, searching for the man she once knew. She did not find him. She found someone quieter, smaller, someone who had been humbled by loss and reshaped by consequences. "Leave your information with the nurses," she said finally, "for medical reasons only." He nodded, accepting the boundaries without argument. The next morning, he checked out of his hotel and returned to the East Coast. Zara found a simple note left at the nurse's station. "Thank you for letting me stay long enough to see her breathe." That night, as Sienna slept peacefully beside her, Zara gazed up at the ceiling and wondered what lay between ruin and beginning. Not forgiveness, not healing, but maybe something in the quiet space between them. Something that might, one day, matter. Spring arrived slowly, as if testing the air before committing to warmth. Zara welcomed it with quiet gratitude she could not quite put into words. The winter behind her had been long and brutal, carved from hospital nights, whispered fears, and the fragile relief that accompanied Sienna's steady recovery. But now, sunlight filtered through her apartment windows, soft and tentative, landing across Sienna's coloring books, like a promise that life was willing to move again. Weeks passed, Sienna healed. Zara returned to work part-time, easing herself back into the responsibilities she once carried with ease. But she felt different now, softer in some places, sharper in others. The near loss of her daughter had reshaped her priorities with a precision no boardroom ever had. She no longer chased power. She chose peace. She chose presence. Above all, she chose Sienna. Still, the past had a way of lingering like dust in corners she rarely looked at. Some nights, when the apartment grew quiet and her daughter slept soundly with her stuffed lion tucked under one arm, Zara found herself thinking about Adrian. Not with longing, not with anger, with something quieter, something she wasn't yet ready to name. He had kept his distance, respecting every boundary she had drawn. He sent medical updates as requested by the specialist. He provided family history when the doctors needed more clarity about genetic factors. But he never pushed, never demanded access, never showed up uninvited. And somehow, that absence felt louder than his once overpowering presence. One early morning, as Zara sipped her tea in the quiet kitchen, an email pinged. It was from the hospital's administrative office. A foundation had anonymously paid for Sienna's remaining medical bills, including future follow-up care. Zara stared at the screen until the letters began to blur. She didn't need to ask who it came from. She forwarded the receipt to her attorney, asking, nearly pleading, for a discreet way to return the money. But as soon as she hit send, she paused. Sienna deserved every advantage, every ounce of safety, every thread of support. Zara let the email sit, unresolved, like a question she wasn't ready to answer. That afternoon, she took Sienna to the park. The sun had dipped just enough to cast long shadows across the playground. Children squealed. Birds cut through the sky in messy arcs. Sienna moved with a newfound carefulness, still playful but aware of her body's limits. Zara watched her with a tenderness that bordered on ache. As Sienna climbed the small rope bridge, she called out, "Look, Mama, I can do it slowly." "You're doing great," Zara called back, trying to keep the worry from her tone. "You're so strong." A moment later, a familiar voice drifted behind her. "She really is." Zara's heart jolted. She turned slowly. Adrian stood several steps away, hands tucked into the pockets of a simple gray jacket. He looked different from the man she remembered, not polished, not commanding, just human, humble. His expression was cautious, as if bracing for the possibility she might ask him to leave. Zara inhaled sharply. "What are you doing here?" He nodded toward the far sidewalk. "I was meeting a colleague at the cafe across the street. I saw you when I was leaving. I did not want to come over. I know my place." I was, looking from a distance. There was no entitlement in his voice, no expectation, only honesty. Zara studied him. Months ago, she would have walked away. Today, something held her still. Sienna spotted him then, her face lighting with innocent recognition. "It's the patient man," she announced proudly, "the one who helped me at school." Zara felt her pulse skip. She waited for the panic or anger she once felt in his presence. But neither arrived, only a complex, quiet stillness. Adrian approached slowly, stopping several feet away. His eyes remained focused on Sienna. "How are you feeling?" "Much better," she said. "I can run again soon, but Mama says not yet." "Clever Mama," he murmured, smiling faintly. Sienna giggled, then ran back toward the swings. Zara followed her with her eyes, making sure she was stable, before turning back to Adrian. "You should not be here," she said gently, not harshly. "I know. I'm sorry. I am not trying to make things harder for you." She expected him to look frustrated, defensive. Instead, he looked relieved that she had spoken to him without anger. "I wanted to thank you," Zara said after a long pause, "for the bills, for the doctor, for coming so quickly. For everything. You owe me nothing," he said quietly, "and I don't expect anything from you, or from her. But helping was the first time in years that I felt like my life still had purpose." The words hit her with unexpected force. She looked at him fully then. Not the man he once was, not the man she hated, but the man he had become. He looked older, less polished, more fragile, more real. The wind shifted. Children laughed. Sienna called for her. But Zara remained anchored in place. "I am not ready to forgive you," she said softly. "I know, and I cannot promise anything about the future." "I do not expect a future," he said. "Only a chance to do right by her, in whatever way you allow." Zara hesitated. The part of her that had survived him spoke first, reminding her of pain, danger, betrayal. But another part, the part shaped by hospitals and heartbeats, and the sight of a grown man trembling beside his unconscious daughter, whispered a different truth. People change, sometimes too late, sometimes in ways that matter. She watched him for a long moment, weighing possibilities she never thought she would consider. Finally, she exhaled. For now, updates go through me, no direct contact, no surprises, and no presence at her school. He nodded instantly. Of course. And if one day she asks about you, we will navigate that together. Slowly, with care. His breath caught. His eyes glistened, though he blinked quickly to hide it. Thank you, he whispered. Zara turned away before the moment became something heavier than she intended. She walked toward the swings where Sienna waited, kicking her heels and calling her name. As she lifted her daughter onto her lap, she looked back briefly. Adrian was still standing there, still keeping his distance, but this time he wasn't waiting for her. He was witnessing a life he never thought he would touch again, and for the first time, Zara realized that letting the past breathe did not mean inviting it back in. It meant learning how to live without fear of its shadow. A fragile bridge had formed between them. Not trust, not redemption, but a possibility. A place suspended between forgiveness and nothingness. A place where, for the first time, the storm did not define what came next. Summer crept into the city with warm breezes and long golden evenings, softening edges that had once felt too sharp to touch. Zara adjusted to the new rhythm cautiously, as if afraid the peace might dissolve if she acknowledged it too loudly. Life had stabilized into something gentle, predictable. A pattern of school drop-offs, late afternoon park visits, and evenings spent reading beside Sienna as she colored animals in bright, impossible hues. Yet beneath that calm, something subtle had begun to shift. Not dramatically, not dangerously, quietly. Adrian's presence remained distant, disciplined, and almost invisible. He kept to every boundary Zara set. Updates traveled through emails written with precise care, each one professional, brief, and respectful. When doctors requested new family history information, he provided it immediately. When Zara sent medical follow-ups, he responded with gratitude, never overstepping his bounds. It should have been simple, and in many ways it was. But simplicity does not always stay simple. One afternoon, while organizing a box of old documents for Sienna's upcoming school admission, Zara came across an envelope. Inside were ultrasound pictures she had tucked away years ago, edges worn with time. She lingered on the grainy image of a tiny hand, impossibly small, suspended in the curve of a womb that had once felt like the only sanctuary she could provide. Something in her chest tightened. A knot she thought she had buried. She set the envelope aside, but the memory of that small hand followed her into the kitchen, into her office, into the quiet of her bedroom that night. It lingered like a question she had tried not to answer. What would she tell Sienna when she asked where she came from? Who she came from? Why was he not there? What story did a mother owe her child, and what story would break her? It was in that unsettled state that the next crossroads appeared. One morning, her assistant informed her that her company had been invited to a private innovation roundtable in Boston. A modest event, selective, exclusive. She agreed without much thought until the organizer forwarded the list of other attendees. Adrian Hale, not as a CEO, but as a consultant for a restructuring firm. She froze. The past few months had taught her not to fear the idea of him, but proximity was different from distance. 2 seats at the same table were different from emails passed through lawyers and assistants. Still, she agreed to attend, not because she wanted to see him, but because she refused to let him dictate the geography of her ambition. Boston greeted her with brisk air and a bright conference hall. She wore confidence like a tailored suit, walking through the doors with her head held high. She did not expect the first person she would see to be him. Adrian stood near the coffee station, adjusting his name badge with the kind of nerves she had never seen in him before. He looked less like a former tycoon and more like a man learning how to exist in a world he no longer ruled. When he noticed her, he straightened instinctively, but did not approach. He nodded once, a gesture filled with respect and acknowledgement, and something that looked almost like relief. Zara took her seat. Across the table, Adrian took his deliberate distance, but not avoidance. The discussion began. Complex, technical, forward-looking, and to her surprise, he spoke well, thoughtfully, without edge, without the ruthless sharpness that once defined him. He sparked debate, offered perspective, but never postured for dominance. He listened more than he talked. It disarmed her in ways she did not anticipate. Halfway through the session, the moderator asked Zara for her insight on a proposed funding model. She answered with precision, outlining risks and innovations. When she finished, Adrian leaned forward, his tone steady and sincere. "That is the most intelligent breakdown of this problem I have heard in years." A long silence followed the compliment. Not because it was inappropriate, because it was genuine. Zara blinked, momentarily shaken. She nodded once, maintaining her composure. After the round table, attendees drifted out to the lobby. Zara gathered her things and prepared to leave, but as she turned toward the exit, she saw Adrian standing near the glass doors, waiting at a polite distance and not blocking her path, nor forcing a conversation. Simply present, she approached cautiously. He spoke first. "Thank you for not requesting a seat change. I know it wasn't easy." "It was fine," she said, choosing a neutral tone. He hesitated, then added, "I am working on becoming someone my daughter would be proud to know, even if she never does." Zara's breath hitched softly. She had not expected that confession. It was raw and straightforward, delivered without performance. Adrian exhaled shakily, the words spilling with difficulty. "I spent years believing strength meant control, power, fear, but watching you with her, I realized strength is something else entirely. It is gentleness under pressure. It is choosing right when wrong is easier. You have that. I never did. I am currently learning it." She stared at him, stunned by the vulnerability in his voice. Before she could reply, her phone buzzed. Sienna's after-school care. A reminder that she needed to catch her flight home. "I have to go," she said. "Of course," he replied quickly, stepping aside. "Safe travels." She walked toward the exit, her footsteps steady but her mind spiraling. Just before the revolving doors, she looked back. He had not moved. He was watching her leave with an expression she couldn't decipher. Not yearning, not sorrow, something quieter, something like acceptance. On the flight home, as clouds drifted beneath the plane, Zara replayed the day's moments. Not with fear, not with anger, with contemplation. People could change, not always, not reliably, not enough, but sometimes in ways that mattered. She wasn't ready to forgive him. She wasn't ready to rewrite their story. She wasn't sure she ever would be. But she could acknowledge this truth. The man she saw today was not the one who broke her. He was someone trying, slowly, painfully, to rebuild himself. And that quiet undoing wasn't hers to fix or guide. It wasn't her responsibility, but it wasn't her burden anymore either. For the first time, she let that realization settle without resistance. Healing was not a straight line, and sometimes the person you never expected to grow became the mirror that showed you how far you had already come. Zara closed her eyes, letting the plane carry her toward the one place she had built from ashes into something whole. Home. Autumn swept into the city with quiet elegance, brushing gold across the trees and softening the edges of crowded streets. Zara noticed the change first in the way the morning air held a crispness that made Sienna giggle and pretend she could see her breath. Their walk to school became a ritual of scarves, warm hands, and the crunch of early fallen leaves beneath their small shoes. Life had settled again, not into the frantic stability she once forced herself to maintain, but into something gentler, something earned. She had rebuilt her routines with intention, no longer filling her days with constant motion to keep grief from catching her. Instead, she welcomed stillness, trusted it, even cherished it. But one truth lived just beneath the surface. Peace, once tasted, has a way of revealing every fracture you used to ignore. It happened one evening in late October. Zara sat beside Sienna on the couch, reading while her daughter colored a picture of a little girl holding a balloon shaped like a star. A show sang quietly in the background. The apartment smelled of cinnamon tea and warm blankets. It was simple, safe, perfect. And yet, when Sienna paused her coloring and looked up with a question Zara had been dreading for years, the world shifted. "Mama," she said softly, "why do I only have one parent on the school form?" Zara froze, her breath caught between past and present. She set her book aside and faced her daughter fully. "Well, sweetheart, families can take many different forms." Sienna contemplated this. "Do I have a dad?" The question was gentle, curious, innocent. She asked it the same way she asked about dinosaurs or the moon phases. But Zara's heart trembled. She took Sienna's hand. "Yes, you do." Sienna blinked. "Where is he?" Zara felt the weight of every version of this story she might choose. She refused to give her daughter a lie, but she also declined to impose a burden on her. "He doesn't live close to us," she said softly, "but he knows about you, and he cares about your health and happiness." Sienna nodded with quiet acceptance. "Can I meet him someday?" Zara inhaled slowly. "Maybe someday, when you are older and when the time is right. For now, you're safe and loved. That's what matters most." Satisfied, Sienna returned to her coloring, humming a little tune. Zara watched her for a long moment, a storm gathering quietly in her chest. Because she knew the next step must come from her, not from fear, not from the past, but from a desire to give her daughter the fullness of truth when the time arrived. 2 days later, she sent an email. It was short, clear, carefully measured. "There is something we need to discuss. Not urgent, but important. Are you available for a brief conversation this week?" Adrian responded within minutes. "Yes, whenever you choose." They met at a botanical garden on the edge of the city during a weekday morning when the paths were almost empty. Early sunlight filtered through the glass panes, casting a soft light over the orchids and ferns. Zara arrived first. Adrian entered quietly, hands tucked in his jacket pockets, posture modest, as if unsure he deserved to walk beside her. "Thank you for coming," she said. "Of course." She guided him to a bench near a bubbling fountain. "There's something I need to tell you," she said. "Something Sienna asked me." Fear flickered across his face, but he remained still. "She asked about you, about her father." Adrian's breath faltered. His eyes closed briefly, as if steadying himself against a blow. "What did you say?" "That you exist, that you care, that maybe one day she might meet you." Emotion welled in his expression, fragile and raw. Zara continued, her voice steady but gentle. "I didn't promise anything beyond that, and I won't. But she deserves to grow up with answers, not emptiness. I will not let her carry confusion. I can prevent." He nodded slowly. "Thank you. I'll follow your lead, whatever you think is right for her." Zara studied him, taking in his features thoroughly. His humility wasn't performative. It wasn't a strategy. It was a transformation woven into bone. "There is another reason I wanted to meet," Zara said. "One day, maybe years from now, if Sienna asks who you were to me, who you are to her, what do you want me to tell her?" He hesitated. Then, with a quiet, aching honesty, he answered. "Tell her I made mistakes, terrible ones. Tell her I hurt the woman who gave her life. But tell her that I grew and learned, that I chose to change because she exists, and tell her I loved her from the moment I knew she breathed." Zara's throat tightened, because for the first time he didn't speak about possession or rights or redemption. He said only from a place of humility shaped by loss. She nodded once. "I can tell her that." They sat in silence for a while. Leaves rustled, water trickled. A child's laughter echoed from somewhere deeper in the garden. Neither of them moved to fill the quiet. Finally, Adrian stood. "I'll let you go. Thank you for meeting me and for trusting me with even a piece of her story." She surprised herself when she replied softly, "Not trust, not yet, but maybe someday, something close to it." He nodded, accepting the truth without flinching. As he walked away, Zara realized something important. Forgiveness wasn't a moment. It wasn't a decision. It was a landscape she could now see from a distance, no longer blocked by ruins. She returned home to Sienna, who greeted her with wild enthusiasm and a drawing of a family of 3 stick figures, one taller, one shorter, and one small with curly hair. It wasn't a prophecy or a demand, just a child imagining her world. And for the first time, Zara didn't feel fear when she looked at the picture. She felt possibility, not romantic, not inevitable, but human. A quiet space between what was and what might be. A space she was finally ready to step into, slowly, carefully, on her own terms. And one day, Sienna could lead them both across whatever future waited on the other side.